This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please go to www.LibriVox.org.